Hi all. We've talked about waiting on God's perfect timing, but let's face it, it's hard to wait when people are dying and people you love are put at risk. And we wonder, why hasn't God acted? Well, today let's put ourselves in the shoes of Mary and Martha in John 11. Mary, Martha, and Lazarus had been faithful supporters of Jesus' ministry. They had welcomed him into their home because their home in Bethany was close to Jerusalem. So when Lazarus became sick, they automatically thought of asking Jesus to heal him. After all, Jesus had healed a man who had been an invalid for 38 years, and Jesus had healed a man who was blind from birth. Surely he could heal Lazarus. And so they sent a message to him. But Jesus, when he found out Lazarus was sick, did not heal Lazarus immediately. Instead, Jesus did nothing. In fact, Jesus waited 2 days before setting out for Bethany. And we find out later on that Jesus had actually waited for Lazarus to die. And we wonder, why would Jesus let Lazarus die? Did he not love Lazarus? And we feel that way sometimes, don't we? Things go wrong, and we wonder whether God really cares for us. But John is emphatic. In the text, he says, "Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days." Jesus had said when he heard about Lazarus' illness, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Somehow, Jesus wanted to reveal something about God. He wanted to reveal something about himself through Lazarus' illness. It's not that Jesus didn't care, but he had a larger purpose for his inaction. It's often difficult for us to wait because we live in a culture obsessed with immediate gratification. Everything is on demand. But again, God has his own timetable because he is working out his own purposes. So precisely because he loved Martha, Mary, and Lazarus, Jesus deliberately waited until Lazarus died before going to Bethany. Now, Jesus' disciples didn't want Jesus to go. Bethany was too close to Jerusalem, and the Jews in Jerusalem wanted to stone Jesus to death. They didn't want Jesus to risk his life, and frankly, they didn't want Jesus to risk their lives. So Jesus told them, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I was glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." We realize that Jesus had more in mind than the welfare of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. He wanted to use Lazarus' illness to further the faith of his disciples. See, our perspective is too limited. All we see is our need. But God sees the bigger picture. He sees our need in light of the needs of others. And he acts in light of that bigger picture. Moreover, as far as Jesus was concerned, growing the faith of his disciples was more important than sparing Martha and Mary the pain of losing their brother. We may not like it, but God is more interested in strengthening our faith than in giving us what we want. That's why Jesus deliberately withheld healing from Lazarus and waited till he died before going to help. He did it out of love because their greatest need was to see his glory. Their greatest need, and ours, is to know Jesus in a fuller way so that we may trust him. And when the disciples saw that Jesus was determined to go to Bethany regardless of the danger, they followed him, even if it meant death. And this is what faith is about. Following Jesus regardless of the cost because we trust him and we submit to him. When they got to Bethany, Martha met Jesus. And Jesus responded to her disappointment by proclaiming himself the resurrection and the life. the giver of eternal life to all those who believe in him. Martha declares her faith in Jesus as the Messiah, the Son of God who has come into the world. And that's what faith is about. Trusting in God because of who he is, not because of what he's done for you lately. Faith is confidence in the person of Jesus. Faith values Jesus for who he is, not for what we can get out of him. Faith persists in the face of disappointments. Faith keeps trusting even when we don't get what we want. Jesus calls for Mary, and she expresses both her faith in Jesus and her disappointment that he was not around to heal Lazarus. And we see another side of God's dealings with us. When faced with the grief of Martha and the Jews, we are told that Jesus wept. See, Jesus genuinely loved Lazarus, and he grieved over his death, even if he allowed him to die. See, God is not detached from our sufferings. He genuinely cares. But Jesus did not just grieve. He also got angry. He was angry at sin and its effect. And wonderfully, Jesus did not just grieve or get angry. Jesus took action. He ordered the stone removed. And when we hear Martha object that the stench of decay would be overpowering, we understand why Jesus delayed his coming. Jesus delayed his coming so that everyone would know for sure that Lazarus was really dead. Not just mostly dead, but all dead. And after the stone was taken away, Jesus prayed out loud. And then he called out, "Lazarus, come forth." And inside the grave, they saw a figure wrapped in linen, struggling to stand and hobbling to the door. Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. Jesus had disappointed the expectations of Mary and Martha so that they could learn that he truly is the resurrection and the life. The raising of Lazarus was an acted parable of what Jesus had come to do. He had come to bring eternal, abundant life. And he delayed deliberately so that he could lead Mary, Martha, and his disciples, and Lazarus himself, to a fuller understanding of all that he is. This is what God does in our lives. Sometimes he has to break our hearts in order to open our hearts to receive him. He is willing to take away everything in order to give us himself. Because when we have him, we have everything. But that's not the end of the story. See, the raising of Lazarus led to a calculated political decision from the Jewish leaders. Jesus had to die for the sake of the nation. And we realize that Jesus disappointed Mary and Martha's expectations so that he could set up his own execution. And he did it so that he could reveal God most fully. God's glorious grace, mercy, righteousness, and holiness was on full display on the cross. And Jesus set up his own execution in order to fulfill his promise to give eternal life. Had he healed Lazarus, Lazarus would have died anyway. Jesus disappointed them so that he might give them more, so that he could offer himself up as their sacrifice and substitute, and by doing so, give them eternal life. In the times when we're perplexed because God doesn't do as we ask, please know, God disappoints us so that he may give us more than we ever expected. He wants us to know him more. He wants us to give us nothing less than himself. So till tomorrow, in the midst of our disappointment, let us take comfort in God's greatest gift, Jesus, the Son of God.